Welcome to this explainer. Today we're looking at a completely mind-bending intersection of ancient history, linguistics, and modern alternative media. We're going to explore how a simple rock, literally just a physical tool used thousands of years ago, might actually hold the key to a massive theological paradigm shift. The sources we're diving into suggest that an entire worldview hinges on how we understand this one single first-century object, and how its true meaning was kind of completely lost in translation. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand this profound shift, we have to know what a touchstone, or basanos in ancient Greek, actually is. Picture a small tablet of dark stone. In the first century world, this wasn't some obscure item. It was an everyday tool used for assaying precious metals. You know, there was no digital banking back then, right? Everyday commerce and payments relied entirely on proving a coin's actual worth. So, to test if a gold or silver coin was authentic, you'd scrape it against this dark stone. Everyone making a payment understood this physical, harsh scraping process. It was painful for the metal, sure, but its entire purpose was to prove its authenticity and value. And this leads us to a massive paradigm shift. See, when modern English readers look at biblical texts regarding divine judgment, they almost always read the word torment. Today, torment implies this endless, purposeless agony. But the original Koine Greek texts use words rooted in basanizo, which directly originates from that physical touchstone we just talked about. Linguistically speaking, entering the fire wasn't originally described as a sadistic punishment at all. It was actually understood as a painful but completely necessary process of testing. It's like scraping the metal to separate the useless dross from the pure, highly valuable gold. To really drive this home, our sources point to Pliny the Elder. He was a first-century Roman author who detailed the actual metallurgical processes of his day. He described how to purify Egyptian silver using Cyprian copper and live sulfur, which is literally brimstone, all melted down in an earthen crucible. So here's a pretty surprising fact. When first-century readers saw imagery of fire and brimstone, they definitely weren't picturing a mythological torture dungeon. No. They were picturing a well-known, highly practical metallurgical process designed to purify precious metal. Part 1. Translating the word basanizo. And this brilliantly illustrates the core issue. If the original audience understood this as a refining process, how in the world did we get to the modern concept of endless torment? Well, our sources suggest translation choices made during the Dark Ages fundamentally altered the text. Just think about the difference between these concepts. By swapping an ancient Greek word that meant testing and purifying metal on a touchstone with an English word that just means sadistic torture, the entire character of divine judgment was totally reframed. The sources argue this wasn't just a simple vocabulary error, it was an institutional shift that weaponized the text for spiritual control. But the linguistic evidence doesn't stop with the touchstone. The ancient philosopher Aristotle famously distinguished between two types of punishment. You have timoria, which is vindictive and inflicted purely to satisfy the punisher. And then you have colossus, which is actually an agricultural term meaning to prune a tree so it can bear good fruit. Colossus is inflicted for the improvement of the offender. When the original text described divine punishment, they deliberately used the word colossus. Think about why this matters. It frames judgment as a corrective pruning process to help you grow, absolutely not as vindictive retaliation. So the absolutely crucial point here is how these definitions stack up to completely change the broader context. Brimstone, from the Greek word theon, literally translates to divine incense or a divine purifying fire. And perhaps most importantly, the words translated as forever or eternal, aeon and aeonios, actually refer to an eon or a specific defined age. They definitely do not denote an infinite, limitless eternity. When you put all this together, eternal fire and brimstone translates much more accurately to an age-long divine purifying fire that lasts only exactly as long as necessary to complete the refinement. Let's move to part 2 and see how this builds into the concept of the divine refiner's fire. Once you remove that concept of endless torment, the infamous lake of fire takes on an entirely different purpose. As one of our sources powerfully states, the fire isn't a cosmological garbage can for endless torture. It is God's divine crucible, meant to burn away all pride and sin. In this framework, justice is strict, for sure, but it's entirely restorative. The intense heat of the crucible is actually described as the highest expression of love, designed to burn away the ego and what they call the AI code of sin that infects creation, ultimately returning the individual back to a completely purified state. Which brings us to part 3, the Songs of Truth paradigm.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how this exact etymological pivot serves as the foundation for a contemporary alternative media endeavor known as the Songs of Truth project. They operate on what's called the Little Season eschatology. This is the belief that the 1,000-year golden age has actually already happened, and our current age is just a temporary season of deception. But rather than dwelling in fear, their theology centers entirely on universal reconciliation. Tying right back to our Touchstone, they view the lake of fire as a temporary crucible. They see the current age as an educational tool where eventually, absolutely everything, even the most extreme antagonists, will be processed through that crucible, tested, and fully restored in love.
But think about it. How do you deliver a message involving phantom centuries and universal reconciliation to a public that is deeply conditioned by fear? If you just write a dense theological essay, people tune out immediately. As the project notes, the prefrontal cortex will reject a complex theory, but the limbic system will embrace a beautiful melody. So Songs of Truth uses high-production rock music to literally bypass the intellectual defensive filters of the human mind. The epic melodies carry the message straight to the emotional center of the listener. And there's a brilliant technological twist to their delivery method. The project extensively utilizes AI vocal generation to sing these human-written lyrics. Why do that? Well, they connect this directly to the biblical verse Luke 19:40, where Jesus says that if the people keep silent, the stones will cry out. Modern computer chips and AI processors are made of silicon, right? And silicon is derived directly from stone and sand. The creators believe they are literally forcing the stone and sand of the machine to broadcast the truth, basically hijacking the synthetic vessel of AI to shout into the digital void. It's an incredibly layered integration of ancient linguistics, historical inquiry, and modern technology, and it all brings us right back to that dark piece of slate, the Touchstone. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. If the sources are right about the Greek root basanizo, how might a single misunderstood word have shaped centuries of human history, psychological trauma, and institutional control? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning and keep learning.